So yes, I'm a PhD student here at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts, and I did in evening courses a bachelor and master's degree in art science and archaeology at VUB. That's in faraway Brussels, so that's a little bit across the parking lot. There you can find that university. My aim during my long period of studying was to find an academic definition of visual poetry and to work with it. Because we will go a little bit into it. There is a lot to say on concrete poetry, on visual poetry, on poesie, visiva, and there are a lot of links with Antwerp. With Paul de Vree, amongst others, and of course Paul van Ostaaij and Bezette Stad. And since 100 years ago, this book was published, Bezette Stad, or Occupied City, and it was a milestone in Dutch literature, but it did not stand on itself at that point in history. So that's also something very important. There were others like him that worked on that. When I was doing, I'm taking you within, there are more than this slides, be rest assured, which is sometimes also good. I'm taking you a little bit into the framework of my research at that moment, because I think it's important, definitely for the students of words, they need to know what is poetry. I don't know if there is a whiteboard marker available, sorry, since I was late. I came over the parking lot. And otherwise it's orally, no problem whatsoever. What is poetry? I know with masks, it should be more comfortable to shout out because we can't even know where the sound comes from. It's muffled anyway. So, anybody? Please, don't let me stand here alone. What is poetry? I will be alone. Let's all wait, and he will continue and put his next slide.
Come on, one of my students.
I see this. Come on, you can do better.
Give it a try.
Elements of poetry.
Words.
Words, okay, that's already a good one. Sorry? Imagery, yes.
Emotional state.
Very good one. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you very much for your active presence in this. I have found out after so many years reading about it that there was no academic definition of poetry. There was one that was quite close, and that was from Roubaud. And he stated that a poem is a union of four forms. And since I am a performance poet myself, I added a fifth one. What did he say as such? I'm going to read this. These four forms are written, oral. These are external aspects, and written, but with a big R, and aural as such, and these are internal forms. And I added the external form performance, because if you go into experimental psychology, communication science, I don't know if anybody knows within communication, how much, what percentage is language within our communication, in our daily communication with each other. What's the percentage of language, of the spoken words that we have when we have a meeting? And that's what everybody sort of talks about. If ever you have a management course, talk about the words that you say. Anybody, any ideas?
50%?
Sorry?
50?
50?
I think 90.
90 or 19?
90.
90, 90.
Yeah.
20?
You're closer. 30% of our conversation is words. Is what we are saying. Which means that there is 70% in how I am here, on all the little noises that I make, the ums, the movement, the gestures, and me sort of going from here to there and stuff like that. On how I sit, what my posture is. Am I intrusive or not? Am I very close to you or not? These are all parts of communication. So that's why I introduced performance in it. Important about this is that a poem needs to be written. Okay? So that's the top part there. It needs to be written. So somebody at a certain moment needs to write it. And then the history of poetry has always been oral. And so poetry has been invented by people around a fireplace, not the one in your house, but somewhere, to tell family histories, to tell tribal histories, and in some countries and in some populations, with some population groups, this is still happening. So poetry is always oral. Whatever form it has, it's oral. It wants to be spoken. The written and the oral part, are very important, because when you read a poem, not when you write it, but when you read a poem, the moment in between your eyes catching the letters and processing it in your mind, that's where the written part is. That means you are processing it. Somebody has written it, has externalized it, but somebody also takes it in. And whilst reading it, don't know how it's with you, but mostly with me it's also like that, I hear it. It's like when you are reading a book and it's very exciting, then suddenly you're within the book. You're chased by dinosaurs or I don't know what, or by somebody else, or the knight in shining armor. That's why. So anyway, so oral as such is the moment that it comes in with you. So that's what we have said. The written part, the oral part, this is the interpersonal part. The performance part are the non-verbal aspects of it. So indeed, we are in the mind of the reader-listener. So I talked already a lot more. You will get the presentation, I think. I will send it to you so you can all put that forward. This is quite important, all. Because a poem, when it stays in its written form in the book, closed, the poem doesn't do anything except for being printed or written on a page in the inside of the book. But the poem always needs to be internalized. And that for the art students is where, yes, again, Duchamp comes in. Because, and I don't know how many of the word students know Duchamp, and it's not much with the stolen urinoirs at that moment, but Duchamp had a theory that an art piece is not just an art piece because the artist thought that it was an art piece and made it as an art piece, found objects or whatsoever, but an art piece becomes an art piece the moment that the audience makes the interpretation of the art piece. So it comes in and the audience starts to talk about it or to make an interpretation. So that were the first 4 years of my master's paper. So not to get you, you're all bachelor students. Anyway. Then the question becomes, what is visual poetry? If you already know all this, what I just have told you. So what is visual poetry? I don't know, this lecture being this lecture, everybody knows that we are going to talk about Bezette Stad. So yes, Bezette Stad is part of a visual poem or a visual poetry book. Anybody else who has other examples? The good listener normally already know one name, because I mentioned this explicitly in the beginning of this lecture. With the connection to Anton. Now I see all the little. They say, I need to be interactive in this course, I hate it. I just want to sit and sleep and read. So, anybody? Well, we'll get later to it.
Paul de Vree.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yes, indeed, Paul de Vree. And I will show you different forms of a similar, the same question mark, visual poetry poem by Paul de Vree. But what is visual poetry? So that was my next part, because I had a definition, I found finally a definition of poetry, because I found a lot of things. I don't know how many, and this is, in this sense, this course is fantastic, because we are creating our semiosphere. Something that a certain guy called Lotman in Tartu, the school of Tartu, that's in Estonia for the people who have a little bit of knowledge of geography near the Russian borders, during the time that Estonia was still part of the Russian Empire, not the Empire, but the big communist CCCP. At that moment, Lotman devised a theory of semiosphere, saying that if you take elements of what the word students know and we put them together with the elements of what the art students know, then we create a whole new semiosphere, because we all have our different interpretations of different things. That's going very straight. There is a lot of research on that. Interesting also is that when we talk about visual poetry, I mean, everybody knows a poetry book is a book. Yeah, a book, and the publisher says like there's a margin like that, and you can just use Times New Roman 11 to send in your piece. And then I always start to revolt. I don't want to write in Times New Roman 11. For me, whatever kind of tool I use to write my poetry, I write it underneath my poem. I write underneath my poem at a certain moment. I have done this on Canson papers, 125 grams, with a purple biro, and I have edited in Microsoft Word version 2011. Because I have noticed during my practice, and I'm already more than 30 years on stage, yes, I'm that old, I'm the old fart in the room here, I noticed that I write differently when I'm using different materials, different tools whatsoever. I think that the art students will have more relation to what I'm saying now than perhaps the people from Word. But try it out. Same idea, write 2 words on a piece of paper, and then put a piece of paper in front of you, take your laptop or desktop, whatever you have, write a poem. Take the same 2 pieces of paper, go and sit on a bench in a small notebook with a pencil, and see if you will write completely the same. No, you will not. Indulge me in trying to do that. Anyway. But also, color is important, because in visual poetry you use color. You use different elements, it's visual as said. Interesting is, and that is what I found out during my research on an academic level, is that all the literature science just stops. When I talked at a certain moment with Kila van der Starre, she started off by, there was a poem which was the half of it was written, and I forgot who the writer was, Dutch writer. Half of the poem was written and half of the poem was recorded. And all literary criticism went about the written part. And we don't even know if most of the critics have ever listened to the recorded part, because there was nothing told about it. So this is a poem that runs through, but I mean, just on one part there is a criticism, on the second part not. So what you sort of notice is, in front of a visual poem, there are a few things. I don't know if anybody knows this visual thing, duck rabbit, or you have this sign where it's sort of or faces, or you see a chalice in the middle. Yeah? So that's the same. What do you see first? Do you see text first? Or do you see first an image? So this is very important. I mean, most of the people from the word part will most probably, when they see a sonnet in front of them, they will almost immediately see it as a sonnet. Because 4-4-3-3. You know it, you see it. It's like that. A haiku or a tanka sometimes gets short. But things like that you will sort of see, just by the form of it, you will already recognize it. It's a bit, so this is important, this is also important within visual poetry. So, second thing that you do is you try to read the message. You try to read the words, the icons, but how do you read visual things? How do you read that? What do you do with that? How do you do that? And then the process that you use after that is trying to mix that together. So in that sense, I'm both academic and both artist, but it's the same process. It's not the same process, but it's a similar process, because the one half of your brain processes imagery and the other half of your brain processes text. Which also means that when you are looking, you are a left brainer or a right brainer, it also influences the way how you see or read the poem that's in front of you. Very important that you know, like Duchamp, you as audience are part of the artwork, because you make the interpretation of the artwork of the poem. Give somebody a poem, and let everybody analyze it, just a written poem, a text poem as such, and you will start in the beginning a little bit with like the same, but sometimes you will have different opinions on the use of language even. And finally, very important, you're listening. Or you try, what I sometimes do on exhibitions, I try to read it out loud. And that's funny. Because when there was a Dadaist exhibition, I performed part of Hugo Ball's poetry in the exhibition, and there were people looking at me saying, shh! And the only person, because they went then to get the responsible person, because I didn't want to stop. And this person said, is the first person that really sort of knew what this exhibition was about. Because a poem wants to be read out loud. So then you have Marcel again. So what is a visual poem? I made a definition. Beautiful. Took me 4 years. This small part of the text. We're going into the different elements because visual poetry positions itself in between all the different art forms. So it's part of all the different art forms, and that's just a problem because you cannot ask an art scientist to discuss a visual poem because this person has no knowledge of literature science and how to read this, for instance. So this is all, you need to have different tools. That's why I also developed a toolbox where we will go in a little bit further. I can read it for you but I don't think that's very useful. We go, you can read it afterwards, and then tell or find where, if there is still something not correct. So it's interesting because we talked about the verbal and the non-verbal elements. There are also non-verbal elements in a poem. There's a Dutch researcher, Ida van Dijk. That's a must-read definitely for the word students. It's in a list that I've mailed you a small list for reading. That was a cynical remark. It's not that. The list, but I tried to do it in a small font type so that I could put more on one page. So Ida van Dijk, she at a certain moment found out, she made a whole doctoral thesis on white space. What different forms of white space there is. The white space in between letters, the white space in between words, the white space at the end of a phrase, the white space on a page, on the margin of the page, in front and back and whatsoever. There is Laura Lopez, a Spanish researcher who lives now in New Zealand, and she did a whole study on color and the use of color and what the meaning of color is in different texts. But now we go, because there has been too much text, so they're situated physical poetry in the middle of everything, in the middle of music. Music? Why music? Well, there is, amongst others, the best known is Mr. Cage. Yes, the one with the 3 minutes, 14 seconds of a complete orchestra in silence. Yes, that one. Also, we will see where that comes from. So it's in between music, because we already said that at a certain moment poetry wants to be performed, it wants to be performed, and you have, as you all know, word students, you have different phonemes that you will, or phonemes that you will use to have different forms of meaning to the words that you say, or to the letters that you say, on how you say it, because if you pronounce the b like a b or a b, it sort of changes, and so on and so forth. Fine art, as we will see, there are some, one of our biggest artists is a visual poet. Later on he started eating a lot of mussels, but before he was going to mussel pots, at that moment he was a poet. And he sold so many of his books that he cast them into gypsum, and from that point on he got sold as a visual artist. So I'm not saying anything about poets, it won't bring you a lot of money, or it will. Anyway, so this is another graphic that I used, because you are going to put together the verbal and the non-verbal of the visual poet and of the performance poetry as such, because when you are performing, if you are performing at a certain moment as a word artist, you will also know that the way you are on a stage, as we have said before, with our communication, the 70%, it does matter. If I'm standing here and I will completely, for instance, do a lecture like this, I think I will have a completely different form of lecture and interaction with you, although that I'm not Stephen Hawkins. Elements. So around the semiosphere that I said, of all the interesting points of different research areas, of different areas in our daily life, we will see that visual poetry wants to be seen, it wants to be read, it wants to be understood after it has been viewed. And the part of being understood is very important, because that's where most of the researchers go astray. Because they keep on with or their art thing, or they will go into the literature critics, so the literature science, But they don't take in, for instance, communication signs, because there we will also have few elements that we will pick into it to understand things. And the mathematical formula that will end this part is the fact that 1 plus 1 is more. Yeah? So the different elements in itself, so the language elements, the non-language elements, they all have a meaning. But the beauty of visual poetry is that when you combine them, you do not have 1 plus 1, but you get a meaning 3. And it really becomes more, because once you dive into with all the different elements that you have, you will get something completely new. Something that, and this is where the fun part starts for your assignment later on. One of the last sentence of my definition is also the reason why I'm here at the Royal Academy trying to do a performance of visual poetry, research how to perform visual poetry, because I said visual poetry was not being able to be performed or to be reproduced orally always at the same level. So you can do it once, but if you do it another time or another artist will do it, it will be completely different. So that's problem number 1. So it's the uniqueness of your interpretation. A poem, in principle, when you read it, and it's a Shakespearean sonnet, for instance, or a Latin sonnet, you have and we will read it, and we have the pronounced part, and we have the non-pronounced part, and we have a and then we continue. And so it always comes to the same, and sometimes you can have a little bit of difference, and yes, it changes there, and you can change a little bit in the meaning, but on the other hand, overall, it's quite similar compared to, and we will try it with our word artists here, we will try to perform at a certain moment a visual poem. So yes, this is an interactive lesson. Again. And then that's art science parts that comes in. The materials, the techniques, and the methods can be dated post-quam, and I was like that. And you can sort of see on the visual poet, or with the visual poet, you can immediately sort of see who the author of the visual poem is. There are exceptions, of course. Revolution by Paul de Vree could have, for instance, well be done by Duchamp, because it's sort of similar. With some of the works that Duchamp has created, and later on also there are different versions of different. But the date post-quam means that due to the fact that it was created at a certain moment, you say the date is that. I will give you an example. There are visual poets who have used a typewriter. You know, this machine that makes a lot of noise and has an ink. I don't know how much in computer aged you all were brought up already with a computer. I still had to write things on a typing machine. But different types of typewriters make different type of poems. So, for instance, you will be able to sort of say this is this typewriter with that type of with black ink and stuff like that, like an art piece that you carbon date, and you go and sort of say like, from what age is this? So you know that if you have a cassette tape, or for instance, if you have a recording of Henri Chopin. Henri Chopin was a sound and visual poet, and what did he do? Henri Chopin sort of descended microphones into his stomach. He recorded the sounds of his stomach, and at that moment he put that on big magneto tapes, so these big recording things, and then he started with putting that on the stage, and he started to play that, and then he started to put the microphone very deep into his mouth and made other sounds to it, and then by that he created meaning. But due to the fact, you know that when you use these magneto tapes, you know that this can't be an 18th century visual poem or a medieval visual poem. You know, because at that moment there were no magnetotapes, for instance. So that's the postcard in this. So, the tool analysis kit, yes. So we have linguistic, and that's for the word people, most probably. This is all sort of peanuts. Yes, we are back to our first year, most probably. You have the units of meaning, and then you see how important this is for visual or for textual poetry. So the graphic sign, in principle, that's almost non-existent in normal poetry. Phoneme, we already said that. So that's very important for visual poetry. The letter as letter in itself, because you have visual poems that are sound performance pieces that just contain one letter. For instance, you have that also. So the word, the phrase, and so on. So, and then you see, for instance, that the verse, the stanza, the poem itself, the series or the chapter, and the book are more important. And the book as such becomes an object of art in itself, sometimes also within visual poetry, or within a context of a certain, like Bezette Stad. As a book, you can read it as separate poems, but you can also read it as a book in its whole and have this whole story of Bezette Stad, or you can pick pieces out of it and sort of read that and do something with that. So that's the first part. Here, for our city poets of Antwerp, this is also very important because some of their work is on a marriage booklet, for instance, like Joke did on the marriage booklets. There are things on silos, there are things on the keys and whatsoever. So the object as such also gives meaning to the poem itself also. So the object, where it is. If it's online, for instance, it's also different. There are also computer-generated poems, for instance, also. Please tell me how it is with time, because I mean, once I get completely excited, I will continue till evening. So this is then the part of the visual meanings as such. So again, you have typography, because what is the difference if you, for the word, I don't know, for you they are all masked people, so I don't know whose word or whose visual here. So for, can you raise your hands? Who does word? Who's the mouth? Okay, that's the front line. Okay, may I ask you a question? If you get a text in Times New Roman 11, for instance, you have the book there. Can you read just, you have this small paragraph there in the bottom? That's small, yes. So like one sentence, please.
It has been 4 years since these events. It has taken me those years to write this, to collect my emotions and gain some distance.
Thank you. It has took me 4 years to write this.
Yes.
No, it's very weird. It's very weird. Anyway, sorry. We didn't discuss this. Okay, so this has, and you have an idea what typo this is? Times New Roman, Courier New, bold, black, italic, underlined.
I don't know which one.
Yeah, I can't see that from there. No, but I mean, imagine you have this, and you would sort of imagine for yourself this line being font size 40, italic, and bold. It has been 4 years since I wrote it or something. Read this now, knowing in your head, 40, bold, italic. Will you read it? How will you read it then? First question, will you stay seated very relaxed as you are?
Maybe not.
Will you have the same tone in your voice? Or will it go, excuse me for the people with sensitive ears? It took me 4 years to write this! For instance. That for me is around about size 40. Just to sort of say, typography matters. Okay? Micro formats and stuff like that, what we say. Points, yes, most probably you know interpunction, it matters, but also points and lines, if there are in any art piece, it matters. Light and color, of course, if I would have said like, it's really, it's not black, but it's sort of grey, it's sort of like 15 or 35, that's more for the other ones, for the other students, it's 35% grey. Would you then read it like that, instead of what I did before, for instance? Granularity, it took me a long time to rehearse on that word, and texture. So what's the texture? Because you have a certain type of papers, you have a certain type of paper. I mean, for me, on that papers, the book has been printed, for instance, it matters. It matters the textuality of the book, what the page feels like, what it is, what the cover feels like. It's strange. I mean, that's why sometimes reading on this tablet things is completely different. You don't retain so much either. It's something else. Then typographical white, as said, and so I definitely, I mean, Ira van Dijk, I mean, it's beautiful. She has also smaller articles, I think there is on the list, there are also some articles about the reading because it's a micro level, for instance, at the end, in between words, if you have a space in between, how long do you use a space? Or if, for instance, you have words that are spaced more on a page. You have words sometimes that you see that are spaced more. So how do you do that? My kids read, for instance, Geronimo Stilton. I don't know if you have kids. Hey, I studied in evening courses, so I mean, 3 kids and 1 dead person. So I mean, during the 8 years that I did, I think so. Anyway, it's possible. Let's not go into the details there. But I mean, so I mean, if you, for instance, read this thing like Geronimo Stilton, I think it's very interesting because you have all the different typos and you even have the possibility to scratch something and then you can sniff. And you can sniff cheese or pastures or ogres. These things really. So that's a page that you definitely shouldn't scratch. But anyway, I mean, this idea as such also exists. So with white space, sort of, what do you do with the white space on a micro level, on a meso level, and on a macro level? Stupid guy. Who did that? Macro level. That's macro level. Excuse me. Artistic materials. What we already have said. Do you put it on a piece of paper? Do you make your book? I mean, Stad is in May, has a certain form, has a certain texture to it. Do you make it? Do you, for instance, like Bezette Stad has been made on houtsnee, wood, on wooden panel, iron wooden, and has been carved. So does that give different things and whatsoever? Artistic methods, we will also see, like I said, with our friend with the muscles, his first book, Pons Bed. At that moment, this was books, poetry books, and Gibson. And there, the poems within the book, they have meaning. Although some people know because he sold a few of his books, but the fact is that there, the meaning of the poetry that is inside also brings meaning to the whole art piece itself. The dimension, is it 2D, 3D? So you have poets, like I said, and we will see that also like Renate Ramon, who's also a sculptor, and his meta-web, for instance, are stone letters in French, sandstone. letters that are electronically cut through to his millimeters imagery, for instance. So that's very important. The distance of things that you put, like it's in class, there is Delphine, I forgot now her name because I don't know anymore. She's the daughter of Albert. I forgot it. But anyway, so there is love somewhere written as a word. So the distance towards the word and towards and between the letters and whatsoever spacing, and so it makes a difference. The distance between the different letters. If you have a 3D object type of thing, the perspective that you have. The visual grammar. That's something that is more related to our visual artists here present. You also know that you have a certain grammar, like your material, you can do certain things with certain materials, you cannot do that with others. You have a sort of visual grammar that you also need to know what is the plasticity of your work. And then the visual tropes, the Gestalt theory, that's very interesting to research also a little bit in it. So you have sort of like things that's more used in commercials. In commercials where you sort of see things. I didn't put a slide in there because there is so many beautiful research on this. Every type of commercial, if you see sort of like somebody telling you this is a very cool drink, and then you sort of see that there is they come out of an ice cave or whatsoever, you immediately sort of say, yes, this is cool drink, cool as in, yeah, cool, but cool also as in cold. So that's sort of proximity as such. And you will also see that books that you sort of, you try to relate things. You will, if you look at you at this moment, you will, if I will ask you to come up here and sort of divide the room, you will already see that in this part, the first part is a little bit darker with the lights. So most probably you will sort of say the first 3 rows are together, and then you have sort of like, you're sitting just on the border, but then you have the group like that, and then you will sort of most probably, you two, so you will divide the room almost like this. And that's why, because our mind works like that. But this is also when you read things. Like I said, you see that it is a sonnet. Why? That's why you see, because mentally you are starting to put the things together. So if you just need to do the research, you throw a few stones somewhere and you will immediately your brain makes patterns. So this, for instance, you have symmetry. If you see same backgrounds, that's sort of the things that you have when you need to sort of have the research on Daltonism. If you see green and red, for instance, you will also see that there are patterns that your brain makes the pattern and will say like this is letter whatsoever, or this is a dog. That's your brain that does that. It's designed, of course, to be like that. But if you have Daltonism, you won't see that. So this is all sort of the things. I mean, and also even within movement. For instance, let's make it very. If I say McDonald's, what's the reply that I will get? Sorry?
Red, yellow.
Red and yellow. IKEA. Sweden.
Meatballs.
Meatballs. Every IKEA shop worldwide.
Square.
Square. It's a box. It's a blue box. And you have the markings on the floor with arrows that lead you through the shop. It's everywhere the same. You are being tricked, you are being guided. What our dear friend Zuckerberg is also doing. He's not a sugar mountain, definitely not. Because he takes you, or his algorithms take you, that once you have clicked on something, whatever it was, it lands. Very strange. It takes your whole computer, your whole research functions and whatsoever, it takes you in a certain direction. And this is also what is done. This is the Gestalt theory that is sort of being used and we are the guinea pigs. Yeah? And then iconography, citation, something more for, again, a little bit more for the art students here. Yeah? You know that a Virgin Mary, if we then definitely go into iconography, Christ. Anybody? What's then the reaction? If I say Jesus Christ? Thank you very much. Just sort of to say, that's it. If I say Muslim, is anybody there that will sort of react to that? There is no imagery, there is only text that is used. Or half moon, for instance. These are symbols, you sort of see symbols. If I talk about Israel as such, in principle, a lot of people will say Star of David, white and blue. Okay. I'm the only geek in town, apparently. Here, so we're going now to a little bit of the genesis of modern visual poetry, because like a lot of art movements, they do not sprout in one location, and it's linear as such. It's not linear, it's rhizomatic, as they call it, rhizomatic, in different places, almost simultaneously. Although that some, for instance, like in Italy, you have the futurists, and there Marinetti has tried to convince the whole world that everybody was following him. Not. Anyway, a lot of history, art history is still sort of in the making. But for instance, you have Gnedov, Poema Consta. It's also interesting to know who was at certain places at certain times. Kamensky, that's Tango with Cows. Very interesting, because that's a very political work. It was made and printed on wallpaper, literally. It was made on wallpaper. And Tango with Cows is sort of making the difference in Russia. At that time, you had St. Petersburg, where in that moment there was still no Russian Revolution, no October Revolution. At that moment, St. Petersburg was the place where everybody looked at the West. And they were dancing tango. Then the cows, they come from the more mythical, Moscow-related part, where at that moment they were looking more east, to the tundra, to the steppe, to everything which was past the Ural Mountains. And don't forget, Russia is still the biggest country in the world. It's the whole continent. I've had a big part of Europe and a serious part of Asia as such. In Paris, you had un coup d'idée, which I sort of always have discussed that it's not per se a visual poem, but it's more like a score. It's also important that it is a score. A score like in a musical score, you will read it as a sort of, it's meant to be performed. So that's definitely you will see. Then the calligram Apollinaire, sort of Il Breu, go a little bit into that. Danza Trisemare, that's less known, but a very interesting part. And then, of course, Dada, Cabaret Voltaire, Hugo Paul, and stuff like that. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Poema Consta, the last poem in Russian. What do you see? Now, let's see if I can mask that. Yes, sorry, please. Yes, please look at white, green. Sorry?
A Bible.
A Bible.
Title.
A title, okay, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, masks do not for communication. A title, yes, okay. What do you see more? A number, yes. Behind you? No. You with the black mask. Blue coat? No? Yes? Sorry?
Nothing more.
Nothing more.
White space.
Ah, thank you. This, ladies and gentlemen, has been twice performed and documented. This poem. It has been documented that Gnedov performed it in the presence, in 1913, ladies and gentlemen, in the presence of Malevich. For the art students, this is a very important thing, because everybody says that Malevich with his black square painting was the first to do monochrome things. No way. This is the first monochrome painting, or Malevich is painting poems, which, by the way, he says himself in the beginning of his career also that he paints poems. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are two performances that Gnedov did, and know what? They were not the same. One of the performances was that he did one measure like that, and others was that he just stood still on the stage. And they are of two different dates, so you can follow that in the research. But this is already a quite interesting piece of work. 1913, ladies and gentlemen. We were in the car, and we said everything has been done already. Yes, sorry.
Sorry, what is the meaning of the
Last poem.
15?
15 is the page. It's really the page. It's the last
Okay.
poem. It's the last poem in the series, and that's 15. So they are all have numbers, and 15 is the last. This is called Constantinople. So this is the reason why I started with my PhD research. How do you perform this? Because Constantinople, when it was sort of like done, it's in the 1912 somewhere. This is a map of Constantinople. Don't know if you can read Cyrillic. It exists even in Dutch translation. It has been published on Auto, I think. I'm not sure. I mean, there is a publication. So, I don't know, anybody who reads Cyrillic? Okay, that's very good, so I can show off here. No. Completely in the top left, so if we would read, we Westerners, important if we would read, what is our reading order? White mask, red computer? Yes. From left to right. So you would only read like that.
No, left to right and then.
Back left to right. So left, right, top left to bottom right. Okay? If we would be living in Japan, for instance, we would read from top to bottom. Or we could read more from top to bottom. If we would write in Arabic, we would read from right to left, indeed. This is Constantinople. Constantinople is sitting on the eastern part of the writing. Anyway, so how do you read it? Very important question. I don't know. I mean, even my Russian friends, they have different theories. But do you read them by block, for instance? You could do that. But there are things that come back. What we would sort of say, like it's the N. We don't have a pointer here, but it's the N, top left, completely in the left, top. That's the Y. And the Y or the E comes back. And the E that always comes back, that you have there, the big one, that always comes back, that these are the seagulls that are going over Constantinople. If we follow this line, and then you have, for the ones who can read Greek, they will also see the F already there. Faski, for instance. But we are not going to continue on this. Just Map of Constantinople, same time drawing. So you can go on and sort of go and have a research. My good friend Sergei Bilikov, but there is no internet. That's a pity. Anyway, you can follow the link when you have the presentation. He performs it, and he performs it left to right, top to bottom. So he follows the complete line. So he does not take. He does not take he does not take the boxes. But there are here, for instance, there's the Bosphor. So that's the Bosporus street that's there. If you sort of go here. Anyway, this is another in the same way. So you see here, this is the back side. This is the wallpaper. The yellow side is the non-flowery side of the wallpaper. This house still exists. It's the Sushkin Palace. It's a tapestry family that bought tapestry in Paris, in France, and he was an art collector. An art collector that collected Monet. Top. So you see, and you can already see different typography related to the artist. I should sort of go. Can't get there. Kartini, so that's Kartinia, that's paintings in Russian, okay? So and then you go, that's in the middle there. Then you go up, and in that room you have Chinese, and then you have where the M starts, that's Monet, okay? And here, Matisse, and next to Matisse you see Picasso. But the O of Picasso is missing, because Picasso was painting Cubist paintings at that moment. Okay. You have there, wait a minute, in the room you have Van Gogh Arena. Most probably some Spanish or French, southern French paintings. Okay. Gauguin is above, if you have the Gogh, above there in the same typo, Gauguin. So you have these. Why do I say this all? Because we also have pictures of the Sushkin Palace. For the art students, and I hope also for the word students, you can sort of recognize some of these paintings that are there. This is the actual interior, but colored in, not professionally colored in, I need to say. Can you sort of see Picasso? This is pages out of Coup de Dé. Il pleut, Apollinaire. What would il pleut say for the ones who don't speak French? Thank you very much. How would we know that it rains? Because the letters go down. Very important what I said, like how you create something, and that's also very important because I haven't seen the original manuscript. That is now, so I would definitely want to see that. But for instance, this is also a poem by Apollinaire. Interesting, this is the original, what he made, and that's what they finally pointed out. Letter Océan, it's sort of Apollinaire sending at that moment text messages via the telegraph on top of the Eiffel Tower to, and then you go to the other page, to Mexico City where his brother was living. So, and if you can completely analyze this is the city of Mexico, this is the almost the city plan of Mexico in the time of the emperor, and of, it's a little bit of Belgian history, of Charlotte at that moment, who was empress, and then later died completely insane of syphilis in the Plantentuin van Meissen, as such. Anyway, swat. Dansatrice Mare. This, ladies and gentlemen, can be interpreted as a poem, but also as a painting, or as paintwork. He also has colored versions of different poems. But I mean, I really sort of try to indulge you when you see the slides, printed or whatsoever, try to perform it. How do you perform it? What do you do with that? Do you dance like the danseuse? What do you do with the music? These are trumpets. I don't need to talk about it. If you start reading this, you will. So I mean, if I just did that, and I would sort of say, well, what did I do? Probably he was like, or he was stupid behaving in front of whatever. He was trying to imitate some trumpets. So, yes, I put myself also on this. So it's not linear, but I mean, it's sort of like, if I put myself out of it, you will sort of see that there is definitely Paul van Ostaaij, Marcel Broodtaerts, Paul de Vree, Renat Ramon, Luc Viers. This is definitely sort of, you can follow them, you can sort of see definitely the influence from the one onto the other, and the constructivism definitely also on Renat Ramon, Russian constructivism as such. Aha, ladies and gentlemen, we are at the essence. I don't know how far we are in the picture. The essence of things. Zeppelin, this is a page out of Bezette Stad. So, if anything, can somebody try to already tell me something, if anything was retained somewhere in the left or the right part of the brain? Can somebody already tell something about what they see here? This is a page. This is sort of considered as being a separate poem. Anybody?
I know my students already got lectures about, but I see someone raising their hand. Oh.
Yeah. I see it like the airplane coming across the sky, and then the bombs of the text, like boxes as if like stuff had fallen down.
It's a possible, it's a very interesting. And what I like about it is really we go immediately into what we see and we make an interpretation. I'm not making a negative comment on it, but it's very important. Art scientists, they will first describe what they see, and that's also like what is there. And that's sometimes very boring because you need to draw a lot of lines and so on. Yes, there is a meridian somewhere. And above that meridian, you will see that. Sorry, I mean, it was an open door that was happening, but I think it was a very good analysis already. So what do? We make an interpretation, semiosphere, sort of like, okay, it's visual and it's textual, so we need to know about this. We need to know about the context, so we need to know about the context when it was done. So it was during the First World War. It was occupied. It's part of occupied city, so definitely sort of occupation needs to be taken into account. So things that we see more. So pre-iconographic description. That means that before we make an interpretation of what we see, we tell what we see. So the top part we see in an oval shape. The word Zeppelin. In very bold letters, very heavy letters. Then we see Dagbladen. And then we see Zeppelin London, and that's more in a square form, in the middle of the page, on the top part still. And then we have sort of, an oval shape of different words in English. Very important, it's not just the Dutch language that is used, it's also the English language that is used. And that's then goodbye Piccadilly, Square, and farewell Leicester. Okay? And then we see, underneath there, we see Beata Insula. And for the people who did it, this is Latin. So it is, Insula is island, and Beata can be married, as in gelukkig for the Dutch people, but also innocent. That's why it's very important. I liked your analysis very much. But it's very good. It's an open door. It's an open door. Interesting. I have a recording that with a group of mine we did. So we go on later on this. I will let you hear it, and hopefully you can stand it till the end. But what you sort of see on the bottom part, bottom part here, this, it's empty. So we have a horizon line with Beata Insula. So the happy island is on the horizon. What island could that be? And then you have Goodbye Piccadilly Square, Farewell Leicester. Anybody has an idea? So yes, I'm already that age that I know this song. For somebody who has seen some war films or whatsoever. Goodbye Piccadilly, farewell Leicester Square, it's a long, long way to Tipperary. That's a song that the soldiers used to sing when going to the front in the First World War, when they were still in the English side of the channel. Once that they were in Flanders, then they sang, we're here because we're here, because we're here, because we're here. This is, you can research it. For 100 years of the Battle of Passchendaele, there was, what was it, 15,000 British men who dressed up as First World War veterans who went in the streets all over the UK and just gave out small cards with their names and where they were in Passchendaele, of course, killed. Definitely within this project, please find the time to go to the Westhoek. Also, not just stay in Antwerp, go to the parking, go to the Westhoek, go walk there. And try to imagine when you're there in the different cemeteries, go to the different cemeteries and try to sort of imagine yourself a half a square kilometers, a half a square of kilometers and a 500,000 men. How that would stack up. Just for that. Zeppelin London. Zeppelin London. But that's another part, that's a square box indeed. So a square-ish type of parallelogram type of form. Dagbladen, so that's newspapers. And then you have Zeppelin on the top. So yes, there is Zeppelin type of thing, but we will go into further on that. This is another part which I thought was very interesting, because you have the court dancers, the two D's, there on top, right and up. And if you look at that image, and you only take that image, and you look on the front of a tram of that time, you will see that that word, the court dancers, are not just acrobats, or are not acrobats at all. But the court dancers is the sort of thing that comes out of the tram and that takes on the electricity from the thing. Those are the court dancers. And you sort of see nerven, so my tense nerves. But the tense nerves are like train sets on a railway, or like tram sets on a railway, for instance. And then you have the word that comes down, paternosterkraal. Well, that's sort of the beats that you use to pray, for instance. In the form of how, if you take and you are praying and the thing falls. It's very difficult to find a picture that completely does the same as that, but I mean, since I don't have this. This, for instance, another page. Vive tout le monde, vive Max, vive Mercier, vive Martel, and it's not a cognac, and Suzanne, vive rien. So there, at a certain moment, somebody made an interpretation saying like, yeah, okay, this is text that goes up. I mean, if you know Mercier, that's the cardinal. A lot of squares called Cardinal Mercier, or streets or whatsoever, but it's Cardinal Mercier that got Van Ostweijer to Berlin in the 1918-20 period. But if you take that out of it with an eye and you make all these sort of analysis where you put your page and you sort of start cutting the page in different patterns, then at a certain moment you see this. And if you know that Susan was a packet boat in the harbor of Antwerp, then you can sort of imagine that there is a demonstration going on with all lines of people with different ports or banners as such. So I mean, it's important to sort of read this book differently, page per page differently. So I haven't done that yet. That's one of the things that I would love to do at a certain moment. But that's more for an academic doctorate thing. Now I'm doing an artistic doctorate. Pons Bet, ladies and gentlemen, this is the poet that didn't sell poetry books until he completely engulfed it with Gibson and then sold it as art pieces. And got very rich with the muscle pots and stuff like that. Paul de Vree, Kissinger. Anybody who can make a very short analysis? I prefer the analysis on this more than on that. But I mean, still, it's two versions of the same poem. Can somebody tell me something on this? Anybody, please. In the red sweater, can you tell me, sorry, yes, you're in my line of sight. Can you tell something?
Yeah, and it's a sewing machine, and there are two words written in it. There's like the very term is just kissing her and like one word.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, both done with the mouth in a way, so singing and kissing, I don't know.
Okay, and everybody knows why I made the link with this poem, especially after Paul van Ostweijer?
Sing line machine.
Yes. Okay. So Van Ostweijer made the poem "Singer Nine Machine" is the best. It's a fantastic poem. It's a lovely poem to do. It brings good vibes to the room. Kissinger. Time of this was the 60s when it was made. It's very important to have the time frame. The machine, the sewing machine, is from is earlier anyway, and it has nothing to do with the metal group. Is that a rock group? It's a rock. Kiss. Okay, I'm definitely getting on. Interesting here, for instance, on this side, is the fact that you have here on the bottom a little cross. And if you follow the cross and you take the K, the letter K, and you would completely turn it around, you get the same shape as a Kalashnikov rifle. Completely the same shape. 60s. Kalashnikov. And the most important part, Kissinger. Kissinger has been Minister of Foreign Affairs of the United States during a long period. I think he was the longest running foreign affairs ministers over a lot of presidents. Vietnam, as such, a lot of this poesia visiva and stuff like that went on with part of the Vietnam Wars, the Cambodia things and whatsoever. Just a few elements of things that you need to sort of see, read. You don't need to, but I mean just elements that definitely. The kiss of love. You have at that moment the very important painting of Khrushchev kissing Mao, I think it is. So that was at a certain moment also painted with Gorbachev on the Berlin Wall in this world. When I was young, trying to break down the Berlin Wall, but anyway, long time ago. Metabet, Renat Ramon, so the sandstone pieces, which is related more to sort of like Brazilian visual poetry, where you have cityscapes and letters, and where you really can sort of see the cityscape. They have different forms. Ramon has also this type of thing where he goes with different letters and signs and whatsoever. Worthwhile seeking. He's still alive. He's in his 80s, but he's fantastic. He's sweet, and he made an anthology of Dutch-speaking visual poetry. It was his life's work. This is Luc Phillis, definitely descendant of the Poesia Visiva movement. I'm throwing at you a lot of names, I know, but Poesia Visiva was definitely sort of all this democracy demonstrations and anti-war in the 60s. So the whole framework of also the wrote Armee-Fraktionen and stuff like that. Watch La Meglio Gioventù, a two-part, very beautiful movie on the history of Italy, but very important in certain parts of that. So the connection between Antwerp, with Paul de Vree, for instance, Paul van Ostaaien, in the period 1918 to 1921, when this was published, he was in Berlin. Berlin at that moment was the place to be. Everybody was there. So, I mean, he met the Dadaists from Switzerland, he met the Russian Cubo-futurists, he met Italians and whatever. So they were all there. There is now, I mean, I sent it, but I don't know if it's in the book of Matthijs, but at a certain moment, cupola is something that comes in Bezette Stad. A lot of times it comes back. But apparently one of the first planetaria in Germany was built around the period that Van Ostaaien was there. And it was a cupola where they first projected them. So I think there is a connection there. Anyway, so it's important to sort of know also the geopolitical context of the moment, because a lot of these experimental art forms are protest art forms also. So protests against different wars and whatsoever. This is Helen White, the effect on using her own body as bringer of meaning as such. So it's a picture of the performance as such. She has a lot of things. This is more my thing, Doel, instead of Doel for the people from here in the area. Doel is, it used to be a very beautiful village with a fantastic ice cream shop. And now it's just empty. Anyway, so for performing a visual poem, what do we need to know? In the framework of what you are going to create, this is quite important, because it's spatial. Is it a 2D? Is it just on paper? A piece of paper is 2D. Is it 3D? Or is it 2.5D? So is it sort of like a book with something that is cut out, or that sort of looks like that? Or for instance, that you have this 3D effects with colors that change, but you're still looking on a piece of paper that's 2.5D. So these type of things is important to know. Or 4D is time a part of it. If you have computer-generated text, for instance, then time as such becomes a part of it. So all the dimensions can be part of it. Then, overall form, is it paper, is it virtual? Does it exist in virtual space? Does it exist in real space? Is it a movie? Is it a picture? Is it a text? Is it an object? Whatever. What are the textual and the non-textual elements, and how do you perform textual and the non-textual elements? Font type, font size, scale, and whatsoever. The color, how do you provide that? That was my first question on my for my PhD. How do I perform differently when it's Times New Roman or Lucinda's handwriting, for instance? How do you do that? And what if the text is in blue and in red? What do you do differently? Still don't know, to be honest. You can help me in that. Thank you. Font attributes, bold, italic, underlined, cross-lined. The color of the surrounding, is it white, is it colored? How do you go on with that? How do you use the typographic white space? Again, how is the formatting done? How do you use your own body? Do you use your own body? How do you align yourself? Are you laying down? Are you standing up? Are you standing on your head? What are you doing? Are you moving? Are you moving around whilst you're doing this? Depending on all these things, what effects do you use? Do you use this, for instance, or are you going to use this as for a certain effect? Because this is also possible to use as a certain effect. Just simple type of things. What do you do? Do you click your fingers? Whatever. I mean, there are so many things. Do you go and stand naked on top of a sculpture and shout out before they come and arrest you? Different options. Let's see if this works. I try to install on my computer so it work.
Farewell, Leicester Square.
Just little interpretation. We tried to do with 3 people, with 3 men. We tried to make an interpretation of this using 3 different microphones, on which one of the microphones there was an effect pedal where we did some feedback and some delay was there and some looping was there. Is that the way how to perform it? It's a possible way how to perform it. Just to sort of say, this is one way, yes.
Why did you use the pictures?
This was because these are pictures that I used in my master thesis to sort of show. These are all pictures from the time. Mm-hmm. So, except for the mouth, it was not the Rolling Stones mouth, it was another mouth. But also to sort of show you that the form there is not just a Zeppelin fleet that goes around where you see the 3 dimensions of a big Zeppelin and further away a smaller Zeppelin, but it's also a mouth. It sings. It sings the mouth with the tongue with the hole there as the square. But the square is also the hole, is also the marker. As such, it's the marker where then bombs are dropped. Okay, so that's also a picture of London there and stuff like that. In the dagbladen, in the newspapers, there were these colored cartoons or black and white cartoons of this. That's why I use the pictures, because just so that you have a visual thing that you will remember better. Because if you just hear it, then it could be even more boring. As such, sometimes I try to do this. I think this one is Nachtelijke Optocht. I don't know if some of you nightly. Here I was a little bit. I used also non-vintage material, as in it is still vintage, but it was from another war or before another war. It's a victory parade. In Nazi Germany at that moment. But it's sort of because it was the only nachtelijke optocht I could find that was not KKK with flames. And I thought that was just a little bit too.
Nachtelijke optocht. Straten, stappen, brekende straten, horizontaal, verticaal, vooral, diagonaal, lichten, klare klarinetten, dansarina, klarinetten, lampen en lansen, transparant. Tattoo,
Original imagery of the Kaiser's army. These are all pictures, movies that I could find of the Kaiser of Germany, of Prussia, inspecting his troops. And the other thing is sort of 1936, I think, first victory of the Nazi party in Germany. But you can imagine that for somebody at that moment, a whole army at night, going through the streets going through. So this is when you read this poem, when you perform this poem, this is something that really needs to go out. It's an orchestra, it's soldiers that is there. You have boots on the ground. You hear this in this poem. I could have Kim Jong-un has done a nightly military parade. Also, I could have put images there. It would have been the same. Could have been similar. These are some examples that I put for you, but since there is no some own location projects and stuff like that, and since there is no internet, sorry, I'm always a bit shy when I talk about them. Coming back to the interpretation. No, it's not the Zeppelins bombarding London, it's the Zeppelins going towards London to bombard the city. it's that part, or passing over Antwerp at that moment. Antwerp also, some of the cartoons that you saw were also of Antwerp being during that time. Thank you. Thus ended the lecture. Are there any questions, remarks? You may ask questions. I don't bite. I can put on my mask again.
Big R in the written.
Sorry?
Big R.
Yes.
In the first.
Yes. Yes. Why?
Why is it?
Because Hugo has done that. Because, it's the guy. I just added performance. So Hugo made this, and because it sounds the same, but it's different. It's like oral and aural. That's something. Oral is you speak, and aural is you get it through your ears. But I mean, he was searching something that would be similar, and that's why he did written and then written with the capital R. So just to make sure that it's almost similar, but it's not the same. One is writing, really, and the other one is reading as such, and without making it too different. So for him, a poem is a score. So that's like you have an orchestra score. It's a score in 4 forms. But I think that the 5th form is something that we definitely forget too much. So the non-verbal elements as such, we forget too much.
I think we should give a little applause for